Hi friends, I hope all is well. In my previous video, I shared how I prep each of these altered sketchbooks. In today's video, I'll share how I work in each one. So let's get started with the board book. I'm using fluid matte medium as the adhesive. Since these board books have heavyweight pages, you can use liquid glue and paint without causing too much warping. The collage on this page will only have papers. The collage on the other page will have paint and paper. This book spread had some good sections that can be incorporated into the collage, such as the brown vertical area along the left side. This area inspired me to use the L composition. As I continue creating this collage, you'll see that working in this board book is similar to any other sketchbook, but it does have the additional benefit of having the ground layer already done. You can incorporate it into the collage, or with the next collage on the right side, most of it will be covered. Adding transparent papers on top of the existing illustration and text adds a nice layering effect. You can see some of the text underneath the light blue pattern transparent paper, but not enough to read it. The text becomes more of a pattern. I typically don't glue paper along the gutter of a sketchbook, but this transparent paper is thin. It won't add too much bulk to this area. Also, the wrinkling will be minimal, if at all. At this point, the collage has dark and mid-tone values. It's time to introduce a light value, so that's why I chose this off-white paper with just a hint of dark brown. I don't want to cover all the mustard yellow on the ground layer, but I do want to cover the image that's the brown foliage. You'll see with the next element that some of the mustard yellow will show through and will be considered a collage element. The L composition is starting to take shape with these foundation papers that are glued in place. I'm continuing to use transparent papers in my collages. I love the depth that this layering of paper creates. I like to secure part of the transparent paper instead of gluing the whole paper at once if the placement is important. I want this pink transparent paper partly on the brown ground, partly on the light blue transparent paper, and partly on the off-white paper. I glued the top section first, then the rest of it to keep the placement. You can see the beautiful layering once it's glued in place. Also notice that I'm changing the shape of the elements at this point. It's visually pleasing to have large to small elements, along with ones that are different shapes, from squares and rectangles to long, narrow ones. As I continue to build this collage, I'm being mindful of keeping the L shape, so I'm placing elements horizontally and vertically. Also, I'm avoiding adding elements too far on top of the light blue transparent paper. I'll add music while you watch me finish this collage. Now that this collage is finished, let's start on the other page. For the right side, I'm applying a layer of clear gesso because I'm applying paint to this layer. Most board books have a glossy finish. This one isn't too glossy, but I want to make sure the paint will be able to grip onto the surface. I'm using clear gesso instead of white or another opaque color because I'm using a painting technique that allows some of the board book to show through. Before I start painting, I'm putting a piece of paper behind the page to avoid the paint getting on the next page and having them stick together. I'm using inexpensive matte acrylic paint to show you how it performs on this surface. You can certainly use more expensive paint, but I wanted to use a budget-friendly paint for this example. Since there's an illustration on the ground layer, it's fun to scrape away some of the paint so some of that layer shows through. It adds texture to this painted layer. I'll do the same thing for the paint layer below it. Having different scribble patterns for each color adds a nice detail to this layer. This mixed media collage will have a horizontal composition. I will continue to create this collage using transparent and non-transparent papers. Also, I will incorporate these two painted layers into the collage so they'll look like elements, not just the painted ground layer. As with all my collages, I like to include all three values, light, mid-tone, and dark, along with elements in different sizes and shapes. To make the design more dynamic, I'm placing the elements so they don't go from end to end on the page. I have a playlist of videos where I talk about the different compositions. I'll link that playlist in the description box below if you want more detailed composition explanations. I'll add music while you watch me finish this collage. Here are the finished collages. I like to include grayscale versions of each so you can see the value contrast. Let's continue on to the altered hardcover book. I typically don't glue pages together to strengthen or thicken them because adding paper and paint will do that. I do like putting paper behind each page I'm working on in case paint or liquid glue seeps through the pages. I'm still using fluid matte medium as the adhesive. I'm creating a simple uneven grid composition for this page using random paper scraps. Unlike previous grid composition collages I've made, I want to show you how I take a basic composition and elevate it to make the design more dynamic. The elements for the first layer won't be the same size. Also, some will have straight edges while others have torn edges. As I'm gluing the elements near the gutter of the sketchbook, notice that I'm leaving some space between the gutter and the element. Most of the papers are heavier than transparent papers, so you don't want the papers to get wrinkled or damaged when the sketchbook is closed. That's why I recommend leaving some space along the gutter. While you watch me build this first layer, you'll see that I'm using all sorts of papers, such as ink stamp transparent, monoprinted, a scrap of an old circular grid, envelope scraps, and solidly painted. Using a variety of papers in different colors and patterns adds to the dynamic design. Now that the first layer of the grid composition is finished, I'm sizing down the papers for the next layer. Also, I'm not adding smaller papers on each grid. There's a lot of different papers on the first layer, so I decided not to make the overall design of the collage too busy. Trying out different designs of the same composition is an excellent use of a sketchbook practice. For example, try a uniform grid design, then try one that only uses torn edge papers, and try this type of design. You can see if you prefer one design over another, or use these collages as reference for future ones. On the left page, I'm using paper scraps again, but adding acrylic paint as well. I wanted to show how the paper holds up with paint. It will be another simple design, a loose S composition. Technically, it isn't a proper S composition because its shape doesn't mimic the letter S, but it will have curves going in the opposite direction. This collage will have a different color palette than the other one. I'm starting by adding curved shape elements that were pulled from my scraps container. By placing each scrap in an uneven and opposite direction from one another will help to guide the shape of the design. I'm adding the purple dots transparent paper to tone down the brightness of the yellow curved shape and add a nice accent pattern on top of it to give it a more interesting look. Next, I decided to add pink and red acrylic paint in between the two paper scraps. I wanted to show how the book pages react to this wet medium. Also, by adding paint swirls to the collage, it will reinforce the curved design. The design looked a bit plain, so I'm adding small squares and rectangles in bright yellow and dark purple. These elements will be considered accents. The placement of each one will reinforce the curved design as well. I added a short second grouping of the purple elements to fill in the area on top of the pink paint that looked awkwardly plain. It still looked a bit plain, so while the paint was still wet, I came in with a black gel pen to add uneven curve lines. Here are the finished collages and the grayscale versions. Let's continue to the magazine sketchbook. Even though the pages of the magazines that I used are on the thicker side, I'm putting wax paper behind the pages to protect them from sticking together if any of the liquid seeps through. I'm not using paint on either pages this time, but I am using fluid medium that may seep through. Also, I'm using a glue stick. I specifically chose this spread because of the textural pattern of the blue marks. Those marks inspired me to use transparent papers that allowed some of it to peep through. This type of altered sketchbook is great for times when you want to create art, but you're not sure what to create. There are images and text on the magazine pages that can inspire and guide the artwork. I'm starting by cutting the elements, then deciding on the placement before gluing each one down. I'm also using some non-transparent papers to place under and on top of the transparent papers, which adds depth to the design. I chose this pink solid paper so there's a place where the viewer's eyes can rest, since the transparent papers and the magazine page has patterns, which makes the design busy. This is something I like to do when I know the design will be busy with patterns. I'm applying the fluid medium to the pink paper instead of directly on the magazine page to avoid getting it too wet. I don't mind some warping of the page, but by applying the liquid medium to the pink paper helps to minimize it. This is the same reasoning for applying glue to the transparent papers, not the magazine page. I'm only applying the liquid medium on top of the paper to help seal it and make the paper more transparent. I like seeing how the layering of papers will look before gluing. This dark purple paper has a strong enough color that will be visible under the pink circled transparent paper. Once again, I'm leaving a space between the gutter and the papers to avoid any wrinkling or damage when the sketchbook is closed. Now that the first two layers are glued in place, I'm coming in with more non-transparent papers on top to define some of the areas and as accent elements. This final layer will have elements that are narrower and smaller than the elements of the first two layers. As I have mentioned before, adding elements in various sizes and shapes helps to elevate the design. Also, I'm using these papers to help balance the colors, which helps to move the viewer's eyes around the collage. I'm using a glue stick now because it's not necessary to use a liquid medium. The glue stick will provide a strong enough hold so these smaller elements will be secured in place. Since the liquid medium is not dry yet, I'm leaving the wax paper behind the page while I'm working on the collage on the right side. I want to avoid the two pages from sticking together. The rock image in the upper left inspired me to use the cruciform composition for this collage. I want to keep as much of this image visible as possible as I build the collage. The other ground papers will be glued around it. I chose light to mid-tone pattern papers for this layer. It'll allow me to use all three values for the cruciform shape, so it'll be clearly seen as the focal point. I'm using the liquid medium to glue this large paper to the page instead of a glue stick for the practical reason that it'll use less product. Also, I'm using a smoothing tool to make sure the whole paper will be secured to the page. I trimmed the paper that was extending off the edges so I have a clear view of the surface. This reddish-orange paper was made using absorbent ground. I love the texture and variation of colors in it. I have a video showing how to make this type of paper that I'll link in the description box. This is the main element of the cruciform shape that the other elements will be glued on, around, and near. I like using a mid to dark value element in this position because of its importance to the design. I decided to cut an uneven hexagon, which is a different shape than I typically use. I'm placing it in a vertical orientation to lean into the main direction of the cruciform shape. As I mentioned, I'm focusing on choosing the other papers with all three values because the ground layer is light to mid-tone value. I like it when the cruciform shape is prominent in the foreground. I'll add music as you watch me finish this collage, and I'll come back to wrap up the video. Hopefully the collages in this video gave you some good ideas on how to work in different altered sketchbooks. In the coming months, I will continue using these sketchbooks to show more ways to work in each one. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Take care.